So we got a second Patreon listener question to jump into, and this one comes from Mikey and Louie, the two super talented people that are behind that Unicron upgrade set that's been kicking around. Be sure to check out their stuff on Cults 3D. I'll link their stuff below in the pinned comment. So if you want to be part of the Patreon listener question like these two super talented and fun individuals, patreon.com/Protoman. If you already listened to the past segment, you know all the cool stuff you get. So let's jump right into their Patreon listener question. And they say here, we love Beast Wars and are always curious if any of the bots that came from protoforms had previous stories, histories, or characters. Like mainly Silverbolt, we always saw and thought of him as the original actual Silverbolt reborn. Who was Blackarachnia, Inferno, Airazor, Tigatron, etc. Well, the sad thing is that I used to kind of have that thing too, where I thought a lot of the old Beast Wars characters were reborn versions of previous Generation 1 characters back in high school, back in the 90s, and I was so wrong. But I can understand that kind of thought. We always want our characters to march forward and transform into new forms. But I'll go through it. And a lot of the supplemental material from Beast Wars really comes from stuff that Fun Publication has done. And there's little things here and there, but I'll get into that. So like to start first, we'll start with the very first like protoform character that we were used to. And that was Tigatron. And Tigatron, you know, the whole story, which is going to be a common thing we're going to talk about today is, you know, the stasis pod crashed on Earth. It was heavily damaged. Thus, he doesn't remember anything. Who he is, what he is, where he came from. It's going to be a common thing that the writing of Beast Wars had to use in order to bring in these new characters and not have them already loaded with a past. And it is what it is. So it left it open to interpretation, and you could have these newly born characters, which is kind of what is implied when Rhinox talked about it with The Spark, the episode The Spark where Airazor debuted, that these are reborn or brand new characters, some of them even born for the first time. And of course, supplemental material will change that years later after Beast Wars had already ended its run on television. The BotCon 2006 comic book, which was written by Pete Sinclair and along with some other members of the Fun Publication crew, taught us that he was actually, you know, Tigatron was actually a bot called Unit 2 and worked for like the Maximal Command Security Force, which was kind of like this crew that was created to conserve the peace during the Pax Cybertronia, which was extremely like, you know, teetering over the edge because of all kinds of war criminals and everything going on Cybertron. And that's who that character was. You know, long story short, his spark, you know, was uploaded onto a blank protoform to save his life, and according to what the comic said, it was like it was damaged in the process and it damaged his core mainframe, and so I guess it added an extra layer to why, going into the retcon of the Beast Wars TV show, that, you know, in the episode Fallen Comrade of season 1, that Tigatron doesn't remember who he is. It was kind of like, you know, there's a lot of different explanations to why these protoform characters don't remember anything. The BotCon 2006 comic book added that extra layer to it. When we get to the next one, we have Blackarachnia. She has, like, nothing. Like, absolutely nothing of any kind of pre-Beast Wars history as a character. And she was also one of these odd hiccups of how protoforms would look, because when Tigatron's pod landed, we didn't get a really good look at how a protoform looked inside the pod. When Blackarachnia's pod was crashing, we got a shot of how she looked inside the pod before she was birthed, if you will. And it was pretty much like Beast Wars Megatron's pre-Earth body with her Blackarachnia head on it, all done in all gray and stuff. So it was in those early moments where I guess the writers and the designers didn't know how protoforms were going to look. They just pretty much looked like undetailed transformers with little visual cues of how they actually look. So it's something that implies, like, was she a pre-existing character? Did she look something similar to that and she was put into the pod to store her away? Was she a war criminal? Was she a previous Maximal, which is implied what most of the pods were? We don't know, and she was probably one that has the least of a backstory compared to everyone else because of stuff like that. Then we have characters like Airazor. Very important episode that she debuted in the Spark, explaining protoforms, explaining sparks, explaining everything that would become so important to Transformers and its lore. And again, we go to the BotCon comics, and they talk about her whole background and origin story and how she's tied to Tigatron, and kind of leads to why she's so tied to Tigatron even in the series. Her original name was Wingsaber, not to be confused with the Wingsaber trademark and character from Energon Superlink and its evolution for the Starsaber character. It's its own thing. Her name was Wingsaber, back on Cybertron. And it was never like 100% like confirmed, but it seemed like she was a character that worked for the Maximal High Council and was hired to take care of rogues within the Predacons and kind of stop their operations and stuff. And through one thing or another, she ended up meeting Tigatron and getting roped into the whole like Predacon dark side golden disc theft. One thing led to another, and just like Tigatron, her spark was uploaded to one of the blank protoforms, and like the same way her core mainframe was damaged, she don't remember anything. So that is pretty much that. And of course, when she's born, it's kind of funny how like there was that original implication that like maybe there's something going on with her with Rhinox, but nothing ever came of it. She has a little piece of Cheetor in her, and that was never really embellished too much because, you know, they could be considered brother-sister characters because of how she was reborn in the episode of the Spark. But they pretty much played up that she had something going on with Tigatron in the past when he was Unit 2 and she was Wingsaber. Those who they were in the past. Inferno is another case of the damaged stasis pod and nothing else. It's a damaged stasis pod, thus he's not going to remember anything, and it's going to make him a little bit crazy. There's no evidence of a previous history, but I mean, my own like fan canon, even though I love G1 Silverbolt, I always found it kind of ironic if he was G1 Inferno. I always imagined how like if he was G1 Inferno, it would be ironic how, you know, one prevents fires, one creates them. You know, like there is no evidence of it that he was anyone, but he clearly was some kind of Maximal character in the past, now reformatted into a crazy fire ant, and that's that. We have like parallel universe stuff where it's like, oh, here's this Inferno that turns into a Universe 1.0 repaint of Mach Alert, aka Prowl from Robots in Disguise, but there's nothing really that's concrete evidence of what he was before Beast Wars. Both Silverbolt and Quickstrike, once again, say it with me, more cases of damaged stasis pods. Of course, because of the Planet Buster, also a damaged DNA scanner. So by the VOC and all of that, so that led them to become Fusors. Unfortunately, there's no prehistory for these characters. Even as Mikey and Louie would like to be the original G1 Silverbolt, it's actually kind of implied that the original G1 Silverbolt might be one piece of Magnaboss along with Ironhide and Prowl from that whole component. But again, it's all up in the air, really, in a lot of ways. So those two characters, unfortunately, no prehistory there. And then you get into characters that were kind of birthed out of blank, you know, protoforms also. So like, you know, Transmetal Optimus Primal, it was a blank protoform. So the body that he went into was a nobody, no one that had a personality or a spark or anything. It was just a blank protoform. And the same thing with Transmetal 2 Dinobot. They used a blank protoform to give birth to who he is. When we get to characters like, let's say, Rampage, not really a protoform character, just was locked into a giant stasis pod to be left to the other side of the galaxy, never to be seen from again. That didn't work out with Protoform X. And one of the last ones that we could kind of bring up is Transmutate, where in supplemental alternate universe kind of material, there's that explanation that she had a relationship with Rampage when he was a prisoner captured by the Maximals and all of that. And, you know, that's the one that used that Transformers Prime RC mold. And so there's some implication that she did have some kind of a past, but nothing in the main continuity. Again, she's a complicated character in Beast Wars, and the fact that Optimus Primal was willing to extinguish her spark implied that she was some kind of character that had a spark, and it was some kind of character that pre-existed and was a living being, not just a mechanical monster with no brain. So there's a lot going on with Transmutate, and she's always been a very fascinating character, even if she was someone that only appeared in one episode and got very limited supplemental material in comic book form. And she's getting a new toy soon, so that's pretty cool. But the only other ones I want to kind of touch on is, all the other protoforms that were, and stasis pods that were orbiting that crashed down. And there was comic books that tried to flesh out what was going on with those other protoforms and stuff like that. Like the implication that Beast Wars Grimlock is G1 Grimlock. The implication that characters like Windrazor, who was a BotCon exclusive, was originally G1 Swoop, and there's supplemental written material that implies that. There's a lot of, you got to really dig deep, but when you're talking just the Beast Wars show, that's pretty much it. And none of those characters really came from Generation 1 Origins. It would actually be kind of a big deal if they did. And that's why when Ravage showed up and Starscream, that's kind of a big thing. But at the end of the day, they all kind of had little pasts. Some of them were covered in comics, some of them weren't, but nothing that was ever implied completely in the show. Bob Forward and them, they really, at the same time, while they would trickle in Generation 1 and past Transformer stuff that was available to them back in 96, 97, 98, and 99, they were really trying to march forward with their own thing with Transformers. I mean, at that time, Beast Wars was trying to be radically different because stuff like Generation 1 and Generation 2 just wasn't making money. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. But it's interesting to kind of look at that, because a lot of those characters, and we see it now even with the Beast Wars comic book that's being done with Josh Burcham and stuff, that they're trying to kind of a little bit flavor out like how these characters were before they got to planet Earth, prehistoric planet Earth. And hopefully we'll learn a little more about that, maybe with a Netflix series or something with the Kingdom one. Maybe we'll get a little more extra pieces of it. I hope so, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, I hope that answers your question. It's a complicated one. I know that there's some people that obviously have their own fan ideas, and that's totally cool. I get it. I mean, same thing with me with the G1 Inferno. I could just kind of see that. But I hope that answers the question, Mikey and Louie. And if you want to be just like Mikey and Louie and be part of the Patreon, patreon.com/Protoman, and jump into the madness that is the Transformer Slag Patreon and all the cool stuff you could get out of it.